there. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us to the next installment of our Energy Speaker Series. We've got an informative event lined up today, and I'm just going to do a brief introduction here, and then we'll jump into the program. Whoops, on the wrong slide. So first, I just want to do a land acknowledgement. Yeah, I am coming to you from my house in Anchorage. I am living and working on Dena'ina land, and REAP staff live and work throughout the entire state of Alaska and recognize the thousands of years of stewardship that Alaska Natives have had over this land. I'd like to invite everybody to join me in letting us know where you're coming from. Please use the chat function at the bottom of your screen to introduce yourself and let us know what native land you're coming from. And if you are unsure, you can use this link here, native-land.ca, to let us know which lands you're on. When you're using the chat function, be sure to select all attendees and panelists. I think it automatically just sends your chat to the panelists, so we want to make sure everybody can see who else is on the call. And while people are doing that, I will just take care of a few housekeeping items. We've got a good presentation and some commentary coming up, and we'll be sure to leave a good chunk of time for questions to be answered live at the end. I'd like to just highlight the Q&A feature. That's where we'll be collecting questions. So please use the Q&A box to ask your questions instead of the chat box. And feel free to type those questions in whenever they pop up. If something's directly pertinent to what we're talking about, we might jump in and answer it right away. And then we'll save a few for the end. So yeah, use the Q&A box for your questions. And then you're welcome to continue to use the chat feature throughout the event. If you want to share any other information or make comments or share any links or resources or anything, you're welcome to do that in the chat function. We are recording this event, so I'll be posting it on our YouTube page and sending a link out in a follow-up email tomorrow. So if you want to share this presentation with anybody, you'll be able to do so via that link. And then just quickly, for anybody who's unaware of who REAP is, just a quick REAP introduction. We are a 501c3 nonprofit based here in Alaska, in Anchorage, with a satellite office in Juneau. We were founded in 2004, and just broadly speaking, our mission is to advance the use of clean energy in Alaska. And we define clean energy as renewable energy and energy efficiency. We do this with a strong coalition of members and partners, and we often talk about clean energy using these kind of four buckets: technology, funding, policy, and people. Technology is the one area we don't work directly in. We don't have engineers or scientists on staff necessarily, but we work to interpret technology in these other three realms. And just briefly, I'll touch on a couple areas that we're working in the other three areas. On the funding side, REAP in the past was instrumental in creating the Renewable Energy Fund, which helped source funding for a variety of clean energy projects throughout the state. Currently, we are working to establish a green bank. There is some legislation introduced in the legislature that will hopefully be able to get passed here in the near future. And then on the policy front, this is a lot of the policy work is focused on our current presentation that we'll be hearing about, this Railbelt Reliability Council. So REAP was instrumental or a part of getting some legislation passed, SB 123, that is mandating the creation of this electric reliability organization. And we've been a major part of this collaborative volunteer effort that we are going to hear about in just a few minutes. And then the last bucket here, the people bucket, is really where we're doing the bulk of our work. Almost half of our staff is doing K through 12 STEM education and teacher trainings. And we do that in STEM classrooms through teaching science, technology, engineering, and math through the lens of clean energy. And then we've got a variety of partners and collaborative efforts that we're working on. I'll just name a couple. The Alaska Network for Energy Education and Employment is working on workforce development, among other things. The Sustainable Southeast Partnership is a holistic, community-oriented approach that has an energy component based in Southeast Alaska. And then our newest initiative, the Energy Transition Initiative Partnership Program, is working on energy planning and technical assistance in remote communities. And our next event in 2 weeks from today, we're going to be highlighting that Energy Transition Initiative Partnership Program. ETIP is what we call it. So if you want to hear more about that, definitely tune in 2 weeks from today. So I think with that, we will jump into today's program. We'll be hearing about the Railbelt Reliability Council, which is this voluntary effort that I just mentioned to create an electric reliability organization. And we've got two very knowledgeable presenters here that have been working hard on this. We'll be hearing from Julie Estey. Julie is the chair of the Railbelt Reliability Council's Implementation Committee and also represents Matanuska Electric Association on that committee. And Joel Groves is the secretary and represents Alaska Environmental Power as an independent power producer on the committee. Joel works for Polar Consult, is a part owner and engineer there. So I think that's all I have for now. Lastly, just a huge thanks to our sponsors, Siemens, Siri, and Advanced Energy Economy as our title sponsor. Really appreciate their support in allowing us to make this event happen. So I think I'll turn that over to, I believe Julie's going to start. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah, go ahead, Julie.
All right. Well, first of all, just thanks to Greg and REAP for hosting this series. I know I've joined as a participant on many of them and really appreciate you guys taking up this important issue. Also just want to do a disclaimer that Joel and I have been living and breathing this stuff for almost a few years now. So if we nerd out a little too much and go into either use terms that don't make sense or acronyms, please feel free to ask questions or to ask for clarification in the question and answer. And we'll do our best to talk as to folks that don't have to live and breathe this every day. So again, Julie Estey, I work for Matanuska Electric Association and serve as the current chair. And Greg, if you could just get to the next slide so we can look at presentation outline. Looks like we lost a little bit of formatting. Go easy on us. But we'll talk about what the RRC is trying to accomplish, the history and how we got here. We'll talk a little bit about the regulation development that's going on at the RCA right now, the progress to date, and next steps. And then we are a diverse group of stakeholders that are trying to come together around a common solution. And we have some open issues right now that we're trying to work together to resolve. And so we'll go into some of those as well. So we'll cover some of the nuts and bolts and then to get into some of the details of where we are right now in discussions. So Greg, you can go ahead to next slide. First of all, what is the Railbelt Electric System? I know when I just was able to breeze through the participant list, there's a lot of familiar names on there, and a lot of you folks have a lot of knowledge about this, but there's some new names to me, so I just want to make sure we start at the base. And the Railbelt Electric System, the interconnected system, runs from Homer Electric down on the Kenai Peninsula and includes Seward Electric, also down on the Kenai, and then runs up through Chugach, up through MEA, who serves from Eagle River up to just past Trapper Creek. And then there's some interconnection, but the actual service territories don't touch. And then you head into Golden Valley Electric Association. So it used to be 6 interconnected utilities. Now it's 5 with the purchase of ML&P by Chugach Electric. And we refer to this in the work we're doing as the bulk electric system. I always am hesitant to call it a grid because it is not the robust grid of the lower 48. It is a group of interconnected systems. So I always try to refer to it just as an electric system. So moving on to the next slide. What is the RRC trying to accomplish? So the RRC, and I'll say that acronym, is the Railbelt Reliability Council Implementation Committee. As I mentioned, it is not an official organization. Currently, it's a loose group of volunteers who have come together because we believe that we can work together in an improved way to manage and plan the Railbelt bulk electric system. So in 2015, there was a letter from the Regulatory Commission of Alaska to the legislature urging more cooperation among the Railbelt utilities and other stakeholders, highlighting some of the previous issues with a lack of collaboration and ideally requesting that the Railbelt utilities solve this and have the opportunity to solve it first. So the Railbelt utilities responded to that and came together around a solution that we created an MOU for. We'll talk a little bit about that later. But so initially it was a response to the RCA letter. In addition, we're trying to create a cohesive approach to how we identify and tackle reliability needs of the system. And when I say reliability, a lot of times eyes glaze over, but really it's just how much redundancy do you want on the system? And really redundancy typically comes with costs. So not only how much redundancy do you want in the system, but how much are you willing to pay for? And that has become increasingly important as we look to cybersecurity threats on the impact to reliability and security of that system, and a real need, in addition to what we were already doing to operate a reliable power system, which the Railbelt utilities have been doing informally for decades, the cybersecurity threats really upped the need to collaborate in a more meaningful way. We are also looking at how to do improved system-wide planning on generation and transmission. And that's not just among the utilities, but inclusive of a wide range of perspectives. So in the past, each utility has made its own transmission and generation decisions. We're looking now to not only expand that so that the region is making transmission generation decisions together, but also opening up those conversations to a broader range of voices, including independent power producers, the state, consumer advocacy groups, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Ensure a level playing field for a variety of providers. That was one of the things that we had heard concerns from the independent power producer community, as they felt like there wasn't a level playing field for them to enter the system and to sell power. So we want to address that in this. And then developing a path to equitably allocate costs for improvements that create system-wide benefit. As I said, our previous model really had us making decisions per each utility. And when we looked at projects that could benefit more than one utility or system-wide, there is not a clear mechanism on how to equitably allocate those costs to the users. Almost everybody, almost all of the utilities is a cooperative. All of us are public power, and there are very specific regulatory requirements we need to make as far as cost causer is cost payer, and a few others that really direct how we can recover the costs of our infrastructure. And so how can we look at a system-wide benefit and help allocate those costs in a fair way that can be approved by the Regulatory Commission of Alaska. Also prepare for the changing needs of the utility industry, including the integration of new technology. Without a doubt, the utility industry is undergoing an incredible transformation, and it's very exciting now. And so operating in a way that it was just each utility, there's more opportunity for this new technology when we work together. And so that was part of this goal as well. But we also acknowledge that we are still run by our local boards who are democratically elected by our members, and they are fiscally and fiduciaries responsible to those members and to the health and sustainability of that cooperative. And so we do need to understand that those local needs do need to be addressed as appropriate, even as we're looking region-wide. And ensure that not only are we creating a structure, but really allowing an organization to form that can have constructive and collaborative conversations and reach resolution as a team of people. And when everybody comes to the table with different perspectives and different interests, that's challenging. We're running into that now, but we really believe it's the best path forward for the Railbelt. Everybody is very committed to that belief and making that happen. And so we're working through it and keep coming to the table to make sure that we achieve that last goal. It's really important to the folks sitting around the table. So Greg, you can go to the next slide. So a little history, as I mentioned, there was the call from the RCA saying, hey, we need to do this in a different way. At that time, the Railbelt utilities also had a new generation suite that was making collaboration and making collaboration, one, make sense from an economic perspective and from an opportunity perspective. And so there was a lot of reasons for the utilities to come together, and a group of utility representatives was formed called the Organizational Development Team. So the utilities initially created a first MOU around what this could look like. What could an RRC look like? We actually, ArcTech, which is a consortium of Railbelt utilities, hired a group called GDS to come and talk to stakeholders, talk to each of the utilities around what this concept could look like. These structures are everywhere in the lower 48. They all look a little different and serve slightly different purposes. And Alaska, of course, as we all know, is very unique. So how can we take what's working and the lessons learned from the lower 48 and bring it to Alaska and make it work here? So GDS did that. And based on that, a MOU was constructed by the utilities. We had a big ta-da moment. And a lot of folks said, we're glad that you guys are collaborating, but this doesn't make sense to us. And we realized that in an effort to really get the utilities together, which at the time was a huge groundbreaking success, we had left some of the other stakeholders out of the conversation. So the organizational development team was created to go speak to these other stakeholders and say, okay, what could this look like? REAP was very involved in that effort, as was the Alaska Energy Authority, ACPERG, some IPPs, Department of Defense was at the table, and others. So we revised that initial MOU based on all of that effort through that year. And then on December 18th in 2019, which doesn't seem so long ago, but also seems like a long time ago at the same time, the 6 Railbelt utilities signed the MOU for the creation of the RRC. And then based on that MOU, it laid out very specific seats at the table, and then how those seats would be identified. And so the Railbelt utilities, after that was signed, we went through those steps to form the current implementation committee of the RRC. The goal is for this implementation committee to then become incorporated and become the RRC, the Railbelt Reliability Council. That group is then going to apply to become the Electric Reliability Organization, or ERO, for the Railbelt. And so, but going back to where that MOU was, that was significant to get all, at the time, to get all 6 utilities to sign this one agreement about how this could be, how we could work together in a different way. And there are some pretty groundbreaking agreements in that, but recognizing that that was just the start of the conversation. And so while it's been a good foundational document for the formation of the implementation committee, the conversations are moving beyond what was anticipated and portrayed in the MOU, and we're now forming the RRC with everybody around the table. So once that was formed, we went to down to Juneau. Not once it was formed, once we signed the MOU, and we all supported Senate Bill 123, which is slide 6. And at this point, I will turn it over to Joel, and Joel, let you take it from here for a few slides.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. And calling in from the land of the Denina today. Thanks to REAP for hosting this, and also thanks to REAP for their involvement in this whole RRC IC process as well. Greg is an alternate on the IC, and Chris is a primary member representing environmental interests. Yeah, so now we're up into early 2020, and the state legislature passed SB 123, which was a bill that charged the RCA with setting up drafting regulations and establishing a statutory and regulatory framework for this new electric reliability organization. So that passed in early 2020, and pursuant to the MOU, the utilities started to pull in other stakeholders and form the IC and get that ball rolling. This provided a mechanism to enforce, or provides, or will provide, I guess, a mechanism to enforce consistent reliability, facility, and cybersecurity standards that will be developed by the ERO. And that's something, I think Julie kind of spoke to that, but there's existing standards that have been adopted by the utilities, or by most of the utilities, but they aren't fully implemented. They aren't really being enforced properly. And so one of the things that the ERO will eventually do is adopt a unified set of reliability standards and then start to enforce those amongst all of the Railbelt utilities. And one of the open questions right now is exactly what the scope of that enforcement will be with regard to entities that are interconnected with the bulk electric system. So Senate Bill 123 will also, as promulgated by RCA regulations, will also authorize the ERO to execute a robust, transparent, integrated resource planning process, and also support the resulting outcomes. This is a key element of Senate Bill 123 and this whole ERO process. This is something that's really been lacking on the Railbelt historically, is a system-wide integrated resource planning process. The system has kind of grown organically over the decades, from the individual, cities and REAs that started back in the pioneer days. They've kind of grown together over time, but there's never been any system-wide planning process to really coordinate that growth and optimize the system. So this is something that the ERO will be doing, and it'll be a new and really exciting thing. Believe it or not. I don't know. Exciting is a very relative term. I guess I have to qualify that because it's also very dry, technical, and complicated. But the outcome is pretty important. And part of this is that this new ERO process will provide for RCA pre-approval of projects that are consistent with the IRP and/or the reliability standards. One of the I guess outcomes of the large number of new generation facilities that were built about 10 years ago on the Railbelt is this perception that a lot of money was spent to create an unoptimized suite of generation plants. And the intent here is to force future new generation to go through this IRP process so you do have a more optimal generation suite in the future. I think that's sort of the high level intent there, perhaps with my own personal filter there. And Julie from the utility perspective may have a very different perspective of that, but that's sort of my perspective of what this large project pre-approval is intended to do. And then the other one here, of course, is to allow the ERO time to accomplish these goals, but provide discrete timelines. So there's as the RRC will submit its application to become the ERO, it will establish timelines to do all of these things, and the RCA will respond with deadlines, hopefully based on our anticipated timelines to do these things and require performance. And this includes things like developing and adopting and implementing the reliability standards, and then getting through the IRP process. And those will expectedly post RCA certification of this ERO be multi-year processes to get to the first, first completion of those key things. Next slide, please. So like Julie said, this is all still very much a work in progress. Just in the past couple of weeks, we have come back to the mission and vision of the reliability of the Railbelt Reliability Council. And so these are fairly newly coined things that we have, a vision, which is a safe, environmentally responsible, reliable, and affordable regional bulk electric system. That is what we aspire to create or to foster. And the RRC's mission, and this was just approved Monday, so this is hot off the presses, world premiere. Mission is to serve the public interest and provide the greatest long-term value to the Railbelt by working collaboratively and transparently to establish and uphold protocols that sustainably balance safety, reliability, cost, and environmental responsibility. So that is what we are all here to do. Pretty exciting. Next slide, please. So to put a little bit more meat on those bones, the RRC's purpose is to, of course, like we've said, to apply to become the ERO focused on accomplishing these four high-level tasks. Establish, administer, and enforce reliability standards. And that includes the reliability standards, the cybersecurity standards, and also standards relating to open access and transmission protocols. Develop, adopt, and administer, here it is, open access rules, system cost allocation procedures, and interconnection protocols. And those cost allocation procedures are specific to transmission cost allocation. Develop and adopt the integrated resource plan for the entire Railbelt electric system. And that the scope of the Railbelt electric system here is generation assets and transmission assets over 69 kilovolts. And then fourth is perform a definitive cost benefit analysis of Railbelt wide or regional security constrained economic dispatch. This one's a little bit more aspirational. That, if I recall correctly, was not explicitly in Senate Bill 123, but it's a pretty big nut that we want to crack. There's some significant cost implications and efficiency implications with that goal. So it is something that I think the RRC wants to take on. Next slide, please. And so why is the RRC important? Upon certification by the RCA, we'll have a regulatory compact, which is basically a contractual commitment with the state of Alaska. And that will be, the point of interface with the state government there again will be with the Regulatory Commission of Alaska. A commitment that the utilities will be bound by the decisions of the RRC. And that is upon certification of the RRC has the ERO, and I'm doing that acronym thing, I apologize for that. This will be not just a commitment, which sort of implies more of a bilateral thing, but a requirement that the utilities and all of the users, owners, and operators, however that might end up being defined, of the bulk electric system will be obligated to comply with the decisions of the RRC, subject to the usual appellate processes through the RCA and through the judiciary. And then again, a commitment of all stakeholders to develop a forum to collaborate and work through issues. And the principal venue for that will be this balanced stakeholder board that will govern the RRC. And also a commitment of the utilities to be inclusive of a variety of perspectives and decisions relating to the Railbelt bulk electric system. And like Julie spoke to earlier, that is sort of a new thing, moving beyond the individual interests of the utilities towards a system level interest and public benefit. And then lastly, commitment of all stakeholders to achieve benefits for ratepayers across the Railbelt region. And that, of course, is the bottom line goal here is, to benefit the entire Railbelt through more efficient operation of this whole system. Let's see, and next slide, please. So regulation development at the RCA. So this whole process has been sort of an interesting exercise of parallel efforts. So for the past year and a half or whatever, while the RRCIC has been preparing to, or working to prepare an application to become the ERO, the RCA has also been developing the regulations that we adhere to. So we've been working a little bit blind because without a specific rule book to draft and craft our application, we're just sort of doing conceptual stuff while the RCA has been developing the regulations that we will adhere to. And those regulations are still not finalized. The RCA has adopted regulations. They're currently under review at the Attorney General's office. And once that is complete, they may or may not actually go into effect. They may require further revision. That's something that we don't know. So we're still working a little bit blind, but nonetheless working diligently. But anyway, so the RCA was tasked with developing the regulations to enact Senate Bill 123 by the end of July of this year, which was a fairly fast track regulatory development process, a year shorter than usual. And the RCA divided the work into 3 dockets, R20-001, which addressed the governance to ensure balance and independence, along with transparency and a thorough public process. And that is, again, pursuant to the ERO, just the balanced, governance for the ERO board and its operating processes. The 002 docket covered the integrated resource planning and pre-approval of large project elements of Senate Bill 123. And the 003 docket covered the tariff and filing requirements that will pertain to the ERO. So all of the stakeholders that are on the IC participated fairly actively in these dockets as individual organizations and not as the IC. The IC did not ever provide any cohesive comments on any of these rulemaking processes. And then the RCA, like I mentioned, did approve draft regulations back in July, consistent with the statutory timeframe, and those are currently sitting at the AG's office for review. And the outcome of that is, in terms of timeframe and scope, whether those regulations get approved or remanded back to the RCA, is currently a big mystery that we're all currently just wondering what the outcome will be. So next slide, and I believe this was going to go back to Julie.
Thanks, Joel. So the current implementation committee governance is built based on the MOU with now a recent revision. So it has 12 members. They're the 6 Railbelt utilities. And when MLMP was purchased by Chugach, their seat was open and is filled now by Doyon Utilities, who does a lot of work with the different military bases. And then we also have added the Alaska Energy Authority. And there's 2 independent power producers at the table, that is SERI and Alaska Environmental Power. And those 2 seats were filled by the constituency. And so we reached out to the Alaska Independent Power Producers Association and asked them to provide two primary and alternates. And so while at the utilities, we used our primaries and alternates as well to be in the same organization, I thought the independent power producers did a really cool thing where they had the primary being from one of the groups and then the secondary being from another independent power producer. And so it allowed broader perspectives, additional perspectives to be brought to the table, which I think we've really benefited from. And all of both the primary representatives and the alternates can participate fully in the work. So they're, some are committee chairs, they're committee participants, they actively participate in the discussion, but then each seat just gets 1 vote. And then there is one organization currently advocating for consumer interests, which is the Alaska Public Interest Research Group, or ACPIRG. There's 2 independent non-affiliated members. REAP seats is seated in one of those seats. And then a gentleman by the name of Hank Cagle, who's worked both on the utility and independent power producer development side, has really brought a great perspective to the table. And then there are some non-voting ex officio seats for the RCA and also for RAPA. And so the RCA's seats there was some active participation until the dockets got to a certain point where there was some conflicts there with ex parte conversations. And so there still are those seats, and but they are not participating in our discussions until after are closed. I just saw a question come up with AEP. That's Alaska Environmental Power. Thank you very much for asking that question. And that is the Mike Crafts group. He's online. I think I saw him today. Owns Delta Wind and other projects. And so Joel is actually their primary representative, and then Mike is the secondary representative. So that was who came together initially. And the goal was then for this group to become the first board of the RRC once it is formed, based on conversations among us, and then also some the current draft regulations. The group felt it was smart to add one more consumer seat that aligns more closely with the current draft regulations and also brings in a new perspective to the group, and that's of a large consumer. And so we had some kind of loose definitions around what this was. We had a open application period, and we also reached out to different folks that were each on our system that met this definition. And we had 4 very diverse, very well qualified applicants, and we selected Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium, ANTHC, to serve in that seat. We have Paul Morrison as their primary, and Paul brings a really unique skill set in that he not only works for ANTHC now, but also previously worked for the RCA. So he has a wealth of knowledge that he can bring to the table. And so they were invited initially to fill an ex officio non-voting seat as they came up to speed. And now just on Monday, again, hot off the presses, have become voted to be a voting member on the RRC. So now we have 13 voting members on the RRC. And so we're really excited to have ANTHC's involvement and perspective. Joel, you want to take the next slide?
Yeah, thanks, Julie. So yeah, RRC Implementation Committee, actually this is progress to date. I'm sorry. So we've been working, since July of last year, so somewhere around 1.5 years or so, or not quite 1.5 years yet. We've developed draft articles of incorporation and approved the RRC IC duties of care. Duties of care basically just governs how we conduct ourselves as the IC. And the articles of incorporation, when filed, the RRC will then formally exist once those articles are filed with the state, and it will be organized as a nonprofit corporation. I think it's the 504 a C4 corporation, a 501c4 if I recall correctly. But anyways, a nonprofit corporation. We've hired a variety of resources to provide subject matter expertise in corporate law, project facilitation and management, tariff development, integrated resource planning processes, development of reliability standards, and regulations and applications. So we've got a whole suite of really fantastic consultants that are helping us do the things that we will need to do, and draft a lot of these materials that we need for the application to become an ERO. We've tentatively agreed to a governance structure and voting thresholds that will provide balance. Established standing and ad hoc committee structure and processes within the IC. We have a bylaws committee, an application committee, standards committee, an IRP committee, a tariff committee. We've also got an executive committee that Julie and I both serve on, as well as a budget committee to kind of oversee the money that's going through the IC. We've drafted bylaws. We have articles of incorporation and a handful of public policies, and we've also drafted our RC budgets. And general organizational framework and other documents. So this whole application that we are drafting, just to speak to really briefly, is not a trivial document. There's a lot of substance behind it. We have an initial tariff that the RRC will have in there, and a lot of fairly substantial things that go into that application. So it'll be a pretty substantial document, and it has a lot of legwork behind it. And again, a lot of this has been developed based on regulations that have been in process and are still in draft form. So there remains some degree of uncertainty about exactly where we're going, but nonetheless we're going there with due speed. Next slide, please. I think this goes back to Julie, if I.
Yeah, so
Correct.
just looking at what our next steps are, we have, again, have articles and bylaws in draft form. As we were getting to the point of finalizing both of those and incorporating, there was a group of the members that said, hey, wait a second, this isn't feeling right. We want to go back and make sure we address some of these concerns that we have. We'll be talking about those on the next slide. So those are up for resolution, and then we'll finalize the articles and bylaws and incorporate. And then, as Joel mentioned, that's when we become a real thing. So there will be the official board of directors. That board of directors will adopt the bylaws and start making decisions, and will eventually approve the filing of an application. There's some questions about cost recovery through the RCA as we go through that process. And so those are all open questions. Nobody's ever done this before. So we're setting precedent as we speak, and we'll be working through all of those questions with the RCA once we actually have draft regulations that, and the ex parte rules are a little bit, are behind us, and we can have open public meetings with the RCA that are other people, other applicants, potential applicants would be invited as well. And we can have some of these conversations about how to make this work in the right way. So again, we will have that initial board meeting. Actually, we've accomplished number 3 already, which we've recruited and selected the large consumer seat for the RRC board, which was great, a great process, and we're glad to have them on board. We're tracking requirements and the work plan. Right now we have the regulations are very lengthy, over 100 pages long, and each provision we have as a line in the spreadsheet, and each of those has an assignment to which committee and when we expect that to be done. So it's a very large project management lift to make sure that we are completing each of these components of the application, and that those are coming with deliverables. They all go through the right approval process, and then they get incorporated into the application in a way that makes sense to other people. It's not just the deliverable, but also any associated narrative or interdependencies as well. We will be finalizing the process for standards and integrated resource planning. The current regulations do not require those in final version. They just want to understand how we plan. What is our process for identifying and enforcing, so developing and enforcing standards, and then what will our process be for conducting integrated resource planning. So those are the processes that we have to have complete. We also have to have a very initial tariff, but a lot of the detailed portions of the tariff will be handled later. So once the RCA approves an ERO in that order of approval, as the current regulations indicate, will be a timeline and expectations around when that first official tariff is due. But we will need to have some tariff provisions in place to even be an entity. And so we're developing that as well. We're currently doing monthly reporting around expenses to make sure that as we're using all of these different consultants and experts, that we are maintaining strict budget controls and making sure that the utilities who are paying for it through load ratio share have eyes wide open in what they're committing to. We're also then going to determine that transition between incorporation and approval, what that looks like, what work will get done and not get done before, while we are an organization, but we haven't received approval to be the ERO. How do we contain costs during that time? How do we make sure that we are being responsive to the RCA for any questions they have as the application goes through the process? So we need to define what that transition looks like. And then completing an application to the RCA by the date established. And as Joel mentioned, that's a moving target. We were initially thinking that we'd be getting our application in October. But what starts it is, according to the regulations, is the RCA will issue notice to the load serving entities or the utilities that we are now under the jurisdiction of an ERO. Once they do that, that starts a 90-day clock for applications to be submitted. So we're waiting on that action from the RCA. We have heard through the grapevine that they're waiting on that action until regs are approved, which makes sense because otherwise we would not have any guidance for how to complete the application. The only guidance we would have at that point is statute. which was not meant to provide adequate guidance for the application. So we are waiting on that from the RCA. That will start the 90-day clock. Once that 90-day clock is complete, anybody who wants to turn in an application will have the opportunity to turn one in. And then the RCA has 180 days to make a decision on that. So those are kind of our long-term goals. But as we're looking, we're not even sure when that 90-day clock starts. So we have a shifting project management schedule, which has been interesting to manage as well. Joel.
Yeah, thanks. So the current questions that are confronting the IC are things like, how do we ensure the organization is balanced? Julie presented the current membership of the proposed board of directors, and one of the open questions that some of the members have expressed is that board composition balanced? And that's a debate that is currently going on amongst ourselves. Another one is, how do we ensure board members act independently from users, owners, and operators? This is a requirement, I think, in statute, is that there be this independence. And of course, with a stakeholder board, many of the directors on the board are in fact representing or affiliated with users, owners, and operators. So how do you deal with that issue where you do that? You do have for the individuals and for their sort of employment responsibilities, you do have this inherent conflict, and how do you ensure independent action by those members? Not a trivial issue there. And then also, what jurisdiction and authority do statute and regs give the RRC and over whom? This has been a big one. That term users, owners, and operators is exactly who belongs in that group, because then there are certain requirements that they have to conform with that the RRC will oversee with regard to reliability standards, operating constraints, reporting requirements. There's a whole host of things, and it gets very complicated, and there's some fairly significant cost issues associated with conforming to those. So who is subject to those requirements is another debate that we have. How do we ensure all participants have the resources and expertise they need to ensure proper due diligence? This is another big issue with the IC is some of the people involved in this process are, utility engineers that are fully versed in all of the sort of technical minutia of what the ERO will be doing. You have people like me who are kind of in the middle. I'm a civil engineer. I'm familiar with the electric industry. I know what all the terms are, but I can watch the dance. I know what it is, but I could never get out on the dance floor. I guess be the way to characterize that. And then you've got other people who are really more on the policy side or the consumer side. They understand in depth the end user implications of these things, but they are not technical people. And so how all of those people access resources and expertise that they need to ensure their proper due diligence as board members is an open question. Because you do have this, one of the benefit of this diverse stakeholder, balanced stakeholder board is you bring all these stakeholders in. One of the challenges is they all have many different perspectives and fields of expertise and so on. And then lastly, how much should the RRCIC finalize before the regulations are approved? And this is kind of a risk mitigation thing. How far down the rabbit hole do you go when you don't know what the rabbit hole is, and when you don't know whether or not you're going to actually be certified as the ERO? So there's sort of this gray area of you need to do some stuff, you could do other stuff, and how many of the could do's do you adopt and push through? So these are some of the current questions that keep Julie and I up at night right now. And I think next slide, and I think that's the presentation, and I guess we can open it up for questions.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. That was a great in-depth review of where you guys have been and where you're going. So really appreciate it. I had a couple kind of broader initial questions, but you did a great job covering them. So yeah, I'd like to encourage everybody to use that Q&A box. Any questions that pop up, we've got about 10 minutes left. Please go ahead and ask those. I've got a couple more I can ask. Maybe I'll start with one while people think of some other questions. But yeah, so a couple of questions. You just kind of mentioned those kind of major sticking points that you're working through. One of which is the balanced, and one of your points prior in the presentation was the voting structure that's helping to create some balance. Could you describe how the voting structure creates balance?
Yeah, I guess so. I'll start off. So right now, what the RRC board is proposed to have is 13 voting members, with the composition that Julie presented on the slide. And what we've done in the draft bylaws is sort of bifurcate important matters from routine matters. Routine matters can be approved by a simple majority. Important matters, and there's a whole host of those that I can't possibly rattle off properly off the top of my head, but those require a supermajority for approval. And those are things like, hiring and firing of a CEO, approving the reliability standards, approving an IRP, approving a budget, certain things like that. And those require, if I get it right, 9 of the 13 members for approval. And in the event that they don't get that, then there's this process of going through, there's a reconsideration vote that will happen where the alternate for the independent will come in, creating a 14-member board. And then that same 9 vote threshold would be applied for a revote. If it still fails to get to the 9, then it would go to mediation and ultimately arbitration for a decision. So that is the current mechanism where the board actions are considered balanced. And one of the current issues is whether or not that is sufficient, that the IC is currently, considering. And we're looking at, I think everything is open on the table for consideration, at least for discussion. But the outcome of that is currently unknown. We're still working through it.
Yeah, and as Joel mentioned, I mean, the RCA in the current draft regs, if they don't change, there's a lot of pages on defining balance. It's hard. It's hard to figure out what does. So the RCA did an attempt of that. There's one section that's more broad, and then there's a very narrow specific section that says, hey, if you pass all of these tests, then you have a rebuttable presumption that it's balanced. Otherwise, if you don't pass all of these tests, it's going to be more at RCA discretion. So based on those current regs, our current, we believe, with the tentatively approved current governance structure, it fits that. But there's still a question of, but is that balanced? And I think that's what we really want to make sure that everybody feels comfortable with. We did go through a mediated settlement to define the voting thresholds because it was a very important topic to many. And not only the number, which was what we were all hung up on, but also the process, because I think one of the big concerns was we want to make sure these are important things. We want to make sure as many people around that table support them, because if you can't get a lot of support, then maybe it's not the right solution. So we wanted that number to be high, but in doing that, we didn't want to allow either groups or certain interests to be able to block things. And so that's why we came up with that mechanism of, okay, if a vote fails, it has to go back to the Technical Advisory Committee, which is a committee of independent staff. And then they have to come back. If it still doesn't pass, that's when there's another independent voice added. If it still doesn't pass, it has to go to mediation and then arbitration so that there is a solution at the end of the day. So you can't just have any group of people blocking something that has a broad range of support, but maybe not quite enough support. So we think we made really good progress during that mediation, but I think as we've all talked about, there's a lot of fear with this. We're all doing things in a very different way. The utilities are letting go of a lot of control that we currently have, which we've all agreed is necessary. And there's new folks at the table that have not had a voice in the past that really want to make sure their voice matters. And I think that's very legitimate. And so we want to make sure as we're constructing this, we're doing it in a way that all of those things can happen, but there's fear. And no matter what we construct, I think that fear will still be there until we move through some of these processes and see how they work. And when you look at what's happened in the lower 48, they've all evolved differently, but the main thing is that they've all evolved. And so we have to recognize that we'll make some decisions now, we'll do our very best, but what's critical is that we put mechanisms in place for for it to evolve. So as we're finding things not moving forward or people gaming the system, that there's a mechanism in place to stop that and move forward in a more constructive way. So those are really where we are now. How much of this do we want to try to overconstruct and anticipate of all the possible things that can go wrong? And how much do we just want to move forward and know that we can fix things along the way? Because one thing we've all agreed on, we're not going to get this 100% correct. We're all doing our very best, but there's going to be things we don't anticipate. There's going to be things that we can do better. So how do we make sure we can evolve as that happens?
Thank you. Yeah. And we got a few more questions rolling in, so I'll just jump into some more here. Alan Mitchell asked, how does reliability in the Railbelt compare to reliability in the lower 48? And why was reliability given priority for the RRC here compared to integrated resource planning and economic dispatch?
Well, I can take the second question first. I think that reliability was a very high priority of the current chair of the RCA, and really wanted to make sure for him that was the foundation. I think integrated resource planning was important and was extra. It was something that was very important to a lot of stakeholders and a few of the other commissioners, but really this was about reliability at its start. And it's the one thing, I mean, that is the thing we are bound to do as the utilities, and the thing that we cannot lose sight of is to make sure we have a reliable system. So I'm glad that it has top priority, because I think you have to have reliability as the basis of any integrated resource planning, because we have a lot of great ideas, but if at the bottom line, we can't maintain a reliable system and cost effective, then we need to be figuring out a better way to make all of that happen. I think as far as reliability, I'm not sure. I actually don't have those exact metrics. So that's a great follow-up for us, Alan, to get you. But I also think it's hard to compare the two. It's like apples and oranges, because our system is different. It's a different configuration. There's not a lot of redundancy. There's not a lot of resilience. And so it's pretty remarkable. I've been at MEA 8 years now. I'm really always amazed at what our operations folks do day in and day out to keep this pretty small system going. So, but I can follow up on that. Joel, do you have additions? What I said?
No, and I don't have any, any metrics on the relative reliability either.
Great, thank you. Just a couple minutes left here, so we'll try to get to maybe at least one more here. Tom DeLong asked for a little more detail on the tariff that the RRC is creating. Will it be a charge that shows up on people's electric bills like the current RCA line item?
Thanks for that question, Tom. That has not been finalized yet. I mean, I think that's what folks are generally talking about. Let's make it very clear and transparent what this is costing folks, to make sure that we can constantly be balancing, does the cost match the benefit that ratepayers are seeing? So we're all about transparency in this organization. So that's been the working assumption. When you look at the draft regs, they allow for it, but they don't require that surcharge fee. What is clear is that each of the utilities need to pay, or that load serving entities, I'll say, because utilities has an interesting definition with the RCA, but each of the load serving entities needs to pay their portion or a portion of the costs by net energy. So basically how much energy you're putting on, or you're putting onto the system. And so there's a suggestion that that's done by a surcharge. And in informal conversations among the utilities, we would like that all to be consistent, so that ratepayers at Golden Valley are getting the same, it's being recovered the same way as the ratepayers down in Homer, whether that's through a surcharge or absorbed through base rates. But that surcharge has been the working assumption, just based on the level of transparency that it creates.
Thanks, Julie. Well, I think we're just about out of time here. My clock just clicked to 1:01. So yeah, I don't know if Joel and Julie, you want to have any closing thoughts you want to just give really quickly? And if not, then I'll just close things out.
I guess just in closing, say thanks, and thanks to everybody on here. Again, this is a lot of important work. Feel free to reach out to folks on the committee if you have thoughts on it. We want to get as much input as we can as we're creating this. And I'm just say thanks to Joel, who has been great at bringing the independent power producer and other perspectives to the table. And also not only as the secretary is introduced, but also serves as a treasurer. So he's got a huge lift, and it's really been amazing to see this group of people come together, really take on a lot of work, and really be fully committed to solutions that work for everybody. So just thankful for this process. It's a long one, it's hard, sometimes it's very heavy, but I think we're going to come out on the other side a better system and better stakeholders that can understand each other and work better together.
Yeah, and I'd just like to thank REAP for hosting this. And if folks do have questions, yeah, please feel free to reach out to certainly to myself, and I'll volunteer Julie as well. Also, I'll mention on the Alaska Power Association website, there is an RRC webpage that has a lot of our information, more detail in the process, where we've been, where we're going. All of our minutes are on there, and a bunch of other stuff. So that's another great resource if people want to totally geek out into this stuff. There's a lot of stuff there.
And there's a very lengthy RCA docket if you're even
yeah,
more. And that really lays out the issues in excruciating detail that each of the different stakeholders is bringing to try to resolve. So
great. Well, yeah,
we really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you guys so much. And yeah, I know there were a couple more questions we didn't get to. So yeah, maybe in that follow-up email, we can share contact information for Joel and or Julie, and also a link to that APA website, so you guys can get more information and ask any of those questions that didn't quite get answered. So yeah, thank you so much, Julie and Joel, for taking the time and speaking with us today. Again, also thank you to our sponsors, Siemens, Siri, and Advanced Energy Economy. And then I just have our next speaker series event up on the screen here. So yeah, feel free to follow that link to sign up, and hopefully we'll see you in 2 weeks to discuss that. So yeah, thanks everybody for joining us, and have a good rest of your Wednesday.
Bye, thanks.
All right,
thanks everyone.
Bye.